On tonight's show, we will go around the NL East and talk through some key fantasy situations. Plus, waiver wire, pitcher preview, and much more. MLB Network's Adair returns to the Beat the Shift podcast next. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruben Guy. How are you, Ruben?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. June is upon us. Mets are still doing strong. It's, I think, their third best start ever. You think our boys can hold this off and make the playoffs? What do you think?
I think they could just because the division is so weak, but did you hear the latest news that Noah Syndergaard will not pitch against the Mets this weekend, that they're pushing his start back?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. I'm not sure if that's a we don't want him to face the Mets, if he's really not help. Who knows? I can't tell these days, but that's too bad. I was looking forward to that match.
Yes.
Anyways, we will be talking about the NL East today. We have a fantastic guest. You might know her already. It's Adair. She's an analyst for MLB Network's Off Base show. Welcome to the Beat the Shift podcast. Adair, how are you?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. Can I have a thought about the Noah Syndergaard situation?
Sure.
Yes.
I feel like it's intentional. Noah Syndergaard has been not so great recently, and I feel like they're just sparing him the sort of New York media scrutiny. I sort of feel like the same thing happened with Jared Kelenic. Like, obviously, Jared Kelenic was also not doing so great, but it sort of seems like, convenient timing. That's my thought.
I would not hold that past anybody. And, I remember when Noah Syndergaard signed with the Angels. So Noah Syndergaard was my wife's favorite player on the Mets. And I remember I found out, morning or whenever it was, and I called her and I said, Robin, you gotta sit down for this one. And I told her, she's like, no. Such a travesty.
Well, it may have something to do with
hard.
their losing streak also. They just don't want extra distractions, I would think. That's my thinking.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about on the show about the Madden firing and, of course, the Girardi firing, which was close to Ellen's heart here in Philly. But before we do that, let's do a little bit of strategy section. And you always have the age-old question. You're a Phillies fan, Ellen, and I know you watch quite a few.
That's true.
Quite a few Phillies games. And you also play fantasy baseball as well. When you watch the Phillies, do you ever root against your team if your fantasy players are playing against them?
No. I'm always rooting for the Phillies, but I mean that just could be that I'm definitely a sort of just real baseball fan first and a fantasy fan second. I do, however, if I have someone who is facing the Phillies and they do well, then I do have this little, well, at least I got the goodness for my fantasy team thought. It's sort of an ameliorating factor. It's kind of for me like when the Phillies are playing another team that I like, if the Phillies are playing the Red Sox or they're playing the poor Angels or, the A's or something and the other team does a good thing, I'm like, well, at least it's not the Yankees who's doing that thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Ruvain, what about you? Have you ever rooted against your Mets for a player? Wow, he just hit a 3-run homer. I went up 4 points in my fantasy league. Yippee. Ever do that?
No. I'm always rooting for my home team, always. There'll be a time if I'm sitting next to someone and say, hey, look, that guy just hit the 3-run home run. Yeah, he's on my fantasy team. But otherwise, I'm not going to say anything unless if you really need, if it's the end of the season and your team is out of it and you're going and you're at the game where you're watching with friends, you can say, you know what, I'm going to root for the Mets, but I'm also going to root for my fantasy players, and I want the Mets to win 100-99, and hope all the 99 runs are scored by my fantasy players. That's the way you have to think about it. That if your team's going to lose 8-7, then you want your guy to hit a 3-run home run, you want your guy to hit the save and everything like that. But if you don't have any stake in it, if the Mets are out of it, which they happen to be a lot, just like your Phillies, if the Mets are out of it, then there's no harm in rooting for your fantasy team, fantasy players on the other team. Listen, we have had Freddie Freeman, me and you and Ira, we've had Freddie Freeman on our fantasy team for years. For years, and he was a Met killer. Does that mean we're gonna root for Freddie Freeman to beat the Mets? I don't think so.
No, but I think it's wise actually to put someone on your fantasy team that is a frequent killer of your favorite real life team, because then you can have that little solace, that little tiny silver lining in the gray cloud. You're like, well, at least I got this for my fantasy team.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, for me, I play in a lot of leagues. And when you play in a lot of leagues, you're going to have players from every single team. And for me, that's a good thing because I can just safely root for the Mets. And because I know that I've got some Mets on my team. I've got some Braves on my team somewhere. I've had some Yankees on my team other places. So I have no issue. I just root for my Mets all the way there. When I first started playing fantasy, I was a little bit conflicted. Oh, no. Do I root for this guy or not? But over the years, I just root for my Mets. And, I will say, though, that I know there are a bunch of fantasy analysts and a bunch of baseball analysts that don't have a favorite team anymore, or they prefer to remain indifferent or neutral in their work. I'm not that I'm against that, but I don't believe that. I think that it's a great thing to show my fandom in my work and my writing and talking about the Mets. I think it just enhances my ability to analyze fantasy. Let me ask you this, Ellen. How do you think that your own very good in-depth knowledge of your own team, the Phillies, helps you in fantasy? Does that give you a big advantage, especially when picking Phillies and so on and so forth?
I think it does. Just like I think any amount of in-depth knowledge can help you, as long as we're talking about knowledge and not emotion. Now, I'm not saying that I'm emotionless about choosing my fantasy players, because I'm not. But I am saying that you should be. So, do as I say, not as I do. I definitely think that it can affect you in both, or it can affect me in both directions. Where I'm like, gosh, I'm so frustrated with seeing such and such players strike out a lot, and so I don't want them on my fantasy team, even if actually they're a pretty good player and it's just slightly frustrating to watch them. Or, conversely, I will say I absolutely love watching such and such player pitch, and so I wanted to have him on my fantasy team. But I think the more knowledge that you have in any way, however you come about that knowledge, and honestly, that's what I love most about fantasy, is I feel like it gives me more knowledge about more players and about more teams. And so I think that more knowledge is always a good thing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because we do this fantasy thing, we know all the baseball players in baseball. You just have to, right? I remember when I introduced some friends to the game, they're like, I don't know any baseball players. I said, no, you play the fantasy baseball, you'll get to know everybody. And it was definitely true for them.
Well, added on to that, let's say your team is the Mets, your team is the Phillies, you know also the majority of the players in the NL East, because they play each team 19 times. So you have the ability to understand other players and other prospects on other teams just because you're seeing them so often. And also, if you play in a local league, let's say you're playing in just a New York league or just any city league, there you can have an advantage by, if it's an auction, nominating certain players locally, like a New York guy who you wouldn't think would get picked in a normal draft, and get them off the board and have someone else fill their roster spot, even though the value is what you think is not there. So you can actually use that to your advantage and milk the hometown and get a hometown player off the board that you wouldn't even think of wanting to have, and fill up someone else's roster with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We in our fantasy leagues at home, we the first 4 rounds just nominated Mets and Yankees, but not really good Mets and Yankees. Players who probably only go for $3, $4, and yet they would go for 15 just because of the fandom. And speaking of the NL East, our show tonight is the NL East, and Ellen is here to talk about all of those, especially at the top. We'll talk about the Philadelphia Phillies, and let's start with the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, Ellen, we are going to start off talking about the Phillies. So recently, very recently, Joe Girardi was recently fired, because his team obviously was not doing that well. Some of his decisions were brought into question. So my question is going to be this, and this is going for a little bit of Phillies history here. Among the last 10 Phillies managers, can you tell me whether or not the manager that I mentioned had a winning career record with the Phillies or a losing career record? This is the last 10 managers. So it's going back pretty far. So the first manager I'm going to mention is Nick Leva. This is back to 89 to 91. And maybe a little bit before your time. Do you think he had a winning record or a losing record with the Phillies?
I'm going to say losing.
Ariel?
I would have no idea, so I'm gonna say losing.
It's losing. He had a losing record. Next manager, Jim Fregosi. Ellen, winning or losing record, career?
I'm going to say losing.
Ariel?
This is definitely losing here. Well,
Yes.
what are we doing to Ellen here? What is this?
Yes. Hold on. It gets interesting here. Terry Francona, he did manage the Phillies from 97 to
did.
2001. Did he have a winning record or a losing record?
He had a losing record.
Losing.
Yes, he did. He lost. He had almost a difference of 78 games there of losing. Larry Boa, the infamous or famous Larry Boa, did he have a winning record or a losing record as a manager?
I'm going to guess that he had a losing record.
I'm gonna say winning. He managed when the Phillies were good, right?
He did have a winning record. He was
he
337 and 308. Next manager only managed
but
two
barely.
games.
Yes.
Next manager only managed 2 games. That's Gary Varsho. His record is 1-1, so that's a pass. The next manager,
I mean, that's great for a Phillies manager, though.
that's awesome. He's one of the few managers with an above or a non below 500 record. What about Charlie Manuel?
Charlie Manuel had a winning record.
Yeah,
Ariel?
I'd say for sure.
Yes, he had a winning record. He had the most wins by a Phillies manager in their history, 780. What about Ryan Sandberg?
Losing.
All right, I forgot he was their manager.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll agree
I
with
did
Ellen.
not forget.
Yeah,
He was
Sorry,
40
yeah,
games
it's
under 500. Pete Mackinnon. Getting closer
McCannon.
here. McCannon, I'm sorry. Winning
No,
or losing
no,
record?
it's fine. A losing.
losing. Yeah.
Of course, losing. Gabe Kapler.
Also losing.
Yeah, losing as well.
He was 2 games under 500 for his managerial career with the Phillies. And what about the one who just left, Joe Girardi? Winning or losing record?
Losing.
Well, what is the point of this trivia? This is just
The point of this trivia is that the Phillies have had since the last 10 managers their record has been under 500. So what do you think needs
what are
to
you
change?
rubbing it
Does
in Ellen's face here? What is this?
Yeah,
No,
obviously,
The
yeah.
question is, what needs to change? Do you think with Joe Girardi leaving, are they going to change what the team philosophy? Are they going to do something different going forward? The team are going to try to do something a little different. Are they going to try to change personnel? Are they going to change upper management and more analytics? What do you think?
Well, I think that that's what Dave Dombrowski has been tasked to do, is just give a sort of complete overhaul of the organization, because obviously the Klentak regime was not successful, and the sort of Ruben Amaro regime not necessarily successful either. And I mean, I think that the real issue is not one that an on-field manager can fix, and that is that the Phillies just specifically, since their sort of mini dynasty of 2007 to 2011, have just a very poor history of drafting, and specifically player development. I would say player development is really more of the issue even than drafting, though that hasn't been great either. So that's not something that the on-field manager can necessarily do anything about. So my main takeaway about Joe Girardi being fired was that them losing wasn't really his fault. Just like, honestly, I didn't think that it was Gabe Kapler's fault either. I just sort of thought, well, what can Girardi do with a bullpen that someone has apparently buried a cursed monkey's paw in? And what can he do about a team that has been assembled with like 3 to 8 DHs? And so that's, in some ways that is still my opinion, despite the fact that the Phillies are undefeated in the Rob Thompson area, the Rob Thompson era, I mean to say. I mean, that said, there were certainly some questionable decisions from Joe Girardi. You know, things that I didn't necessarily agree with, and I understand that like hindsight is obviously 2020, but some things that even at the time I was like, what is happening? Why is this the decision being made? I think specifically, and I think a lot of fans think specifically of the game in Atlanta. I'm not remembering the exact date of it, where Bryce Harper had come back and tied the game, and then Girardi would not put Corey Knebel in for the save because he has very particular rules about bullpen usage. And I think that was something that irked a lot of people. And by a lot of people, I would include Bryce Harper in that statement. I think one of the more telling things about Girardi's tenure is not so much the sort of miraculous run that the Phillies have been on, where I've kind of been like, are the Phillies in a baseball movie? What's going on right now? But the sort of the very pointed comments that Harper came out with about Girardi not giving the young Phillies enough playing time. So Harper's really taken Bryson Stott under his wing, and you can see that he was upset about the fact that Stott wasn't being put in the lineup regularly after he made the major league club out of spring training, and the fact that he was demoted. And I agree, like the young guys need regular playing time, and the top of the lineup has a lot of solid veteran guys, and it's fair to spend the last 3 spots in the order like really giving Alec Boehm a shot. I mean, not that he hasn't had a shot, but like a shot to turn it around, and like really giving Bryson Stott a shot, and Mickey Moniak like a chance to play every day at the major league level and see how they can make adjustments. And I think, you know, maybe the thing to point to, although this does sort of feel like constructing a narrative after the fact, is that Girardi was fired from the Yankees for not being the best, I don't know exactly the right phrase, like clubhouse communicator. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's, you know, that his head was just always famously down in his binder. I don't know if it means that he wasn't always a clear communicator, or if he just wasn't giving good St. Crispin's Day speeches in the locker room. And so I don't know, similarly, if it's that a manager getting fired is a wake-up call. Not that it's, you know, necessarily had the same effect for the Angels, unfortunately. Or if there's a certain amount of like, you know, the cat's away and now the mice can play for a second. Or if maybe Rob Thompson is just actually like a good fit for this group of guys in terms of managing personalities, in terms of that particular part of his job. Because it certainly looks like they're playing looser. And, you know, maybe that's just a sort of one win leads to good vibes, leads to another win kind of a situation. Like, how can you tell that people have good clubhouse chemistry? It's because they're winning and they're having a good time. But I do genuinely wonder if for the young players, feeling like they can play now and they aren't pressured to produce in every single at bat, or they're going to be benched or they're going to be sent down. I wonder if that's really making a difference. And, you know, that's maybe legitimately why we see Bryson Stott having kind of gone off in the last week since Girardi was fired, or that's why you get, you know, Alec Boehm and Matt Vierling both homering off of Josh Hader. So that's, I guess, the one thing that I can even point to at this juncture that might explain the thing that we've seen, other than it's just kind of, you know, the pendulum of luck.
Yeah. Were you a fan of Girardi? I mean, obviously, his reputation was poor in the usage of the bullpen, and it obviously appears that he lost the clubhouse, which, when that coupled with the fact that he didn't produce results, means that he really didn't have a good hold on the team. But did you like him as a manager, or were you indifferent? Did you not like him? Like, what was your take on him personally?
I will say that, and, you know, perhaps history has proved me to be wrong, but of the managers that they were clearly actually considering in the fall of 2019, Girardi was my choice, just because I thought that he would do the best job of sort of integrating analytics, which I think is still a sort of struggle for the Phillies organization as a whole. And so, in that regard, I came in with optimism about him, and I still don't think that it was necessarily his fault. However, he certainly made decisions that I was not a fan of. So I think I came to be indifferent about Joe Girardi. I was not a the hashtag fire Girardi person, but I wasn't like a hashtag fire Kapler person either. So I guess, I would say that I respect the work that he did, and it seems like he maybe just wasn't the right fit for these personalities.
Well, he was picked over, I think it was Buck Showalter and Dusty Baker. I think those are the other two
Yep,
people who
those
were
were the
he was
other
down
two
to.
people.
And it obviously looks like a bad move at this point, but I don't think it's his fault. I think it's the fault of management. They're fielding a team that, because Bryce Harper's hurt, they're playing two DHs in the outfield, and their defense is just so poor. You can't win if your defense either up the middle or they're weak arms in the outfield. We understand there's a DH in the National League, so you're supposed to be able to have an extra hitter. But when you have Kyle Schwarber in left field and Nick Castellanos in right field, when one of them is supposed to be DHing because Harper can't play, it's not. He was put into a bad situation. Plus, they've always had a bad bullpen recently in recent years, and Corey Knebel is not the solution. They needed more stuff around him. I think more of a solution for the Phillies bullpen is to use Sir Anthony Dominguez more. I think he's the guy.
I agree.
He's the who can turn that bullpen around. I think, in my opinion, I think they end up trading Knebel if they fall out of it. And I think Sir Anthony Dominguez is going to be the closer again, like he was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about trading, because I think that they need Corey Knebel as well. I was actually a fan of them bringing in Knebel in the off season, partly because I thought that because historically Middleton has not gone over the luxury tax, that he also would not, and that the Phillies were losing 4 arms from their bullpen, and that they needed a number of guys, and so they couldn't just go out and get one, Raciel Iglesias and think that the problem was going to be solved. And I think I was just really not a fan of the fact that the other 2 people that Dombrowski added were Juris Familia and Brad Hand. Hand has been okay recently, but they're still just not the other relievers that I would have picked. I would have picked 3 people sort of around the Corey Knebel price range, and then had just a little bit more options of stability in the back of the bullpen. But I mean, honestly, given the price that was paid for Familia and Brad Hand, I would rather have had one Kenley Jansen than 2 of those guys. So, there are moves that I question all around. And in terms of the defense, obviously, I think that as much as we love Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber as hitters and as personalities and human beings, they are sort of known dump trucks out there defense wise, but they're not the only problem. And I think that the real issue is that, mostly Odubel Herrera has been out there in center field. His defense is wildly inconsistent and sort of bad on the aggregate. Didi Gregorius has missed a fair amount of time, but, he's the worst shortstop for outs above average since 2018, and it's not even particularly close. So, then when you add to that kind of the very public errors that Alec Boehm gets, and I actually don't even think that Boehm is the worst defender out there. I think you just see when he makes an error, and you can't, or a casual fan can't see Nick Castellanos' range. Do you know what I mean? They're like, oh, he's just going for the ball and he didn't get there, as opposed to a lot of other players would have gotten to that ball. And this sort of same issue at times for Gregorius. So yeah, the whole basically, especially now that Gene Segura has broken his finger, he was like the one place that the opposing team could hit the ball, and I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath. It's not great out there. It's not great out there with the defense.
No. A little bit of fantasy relevance. Who do you think the Phillies MVP has been this season, and what would you do with him in fantasy in terms of, hold, buy, sell, that kind of thing?
Oh, I mean, it's Bryce Harper, and not just because he's obviously literally the reigning NL MVP, but he's been incredible. He's fifth in the National League in batting average and home runs and RBI, which, RBI is an important MVP stat, as in who has literally helped your team, whether that's, your fantasy team or your real life team. And he has 6 stolen bases, so that's helpful to your fantasy team, probably more than to the Phillies. And in terms of what to do with Harper, I think that that actually is an interesting question in fantasy because of the injury risk with his arm. And he's not able to throw. Obviously, that's the main issue. But he even had to sit a little bit because his arm was hurting, and so I could see somebody trying to trade Harper if they felt like they had a position of strength otherwise, but that feels hard to me, because who are you really trading him for, unless it's a deeper league and you've got a lot of holes to fill, and you're like, I can trade Harper and I can fill, I can get a pitcher and I need a third baseman or whatever, that maybe you could make that kind of a depth play. But in terms of players who have actually been better than him in terms of getting his kind of production, I tend to not like to do those, to trade away one guy for multiple guys. I try to do the opposite.
Yeah, I think that in terms of fantasy, the interesting player to talk about is Zach Wheeler. If you look at his full season stats, it's 3.14 ERA, which actually masks the fact that the first 3 starts of his were just his spring training warm-ups. Like the Phillies didn't use him to especially be the dominant self he was. They used it as spring, instead of having him do spring training, just pitch what you can. If you look at his ERA since the first 3 outings, he has a 1.61 ERA with a 1.03 WHIP with an unlucky 3.24 BABIP. He's thrown since the first 3, 56 strikeouts to only 11 walks. So I think that in terms of fantasy, it might even be a buy for Wheeler. I mean, everybody is talking about Shane McClanahan and Corbin Burns is lighting it up. I think that the fact that his overall numbers mask what his true talent is, I think Wheeler could actually be a buy. I would be wanting to trade for Zach Wheeler at this point in fantasy. Do you agree, Ruvain?
I do, but Wheeler's going to be expensive. So actually, the guy I'd want to trade for is a guy like Zach Eflin, who's pitching very good. And if you include today's outing, his WAR for the Phillies is right now, I have it at 1.3, which is third on the roster for pitchers behind Wheeler and Nola. And he's pitching much better than his career averages. He's been doing it. He's stepping into his own. A couple of years ago, people were saying in fantasy, "Oh yeah, Eflin's the guy. He's going to break out. He's going to break out." This actually may be his breakout year. And you know what? You may be able to get him much cheaper than Zach Wheeler. And if you need to fill in a hole for a second or third starter on your roster, he's not that bad of an option to have.
Yeah, I feel like there could be leagues where Zach Eflin is still out there, because I know that there's a lot of people who just don't believe in him. And, I think the key to his success is whether or not that curveball is working, because it's exceptional when it's working really well. But there are starts, I have watched them where the curveball is, clearly he's not using it as much, which means that he doesn't have as good of a feel for it, or it's not quite landing in the way that he wants to. And that, yeah, he can get crushed in those starts. Is the only, I guess, sort of caveat emptor with Zach Eflin. But in terms of Wheeler, I feel like, yeah, if you can get somebody to think that he's not, one of the like 10 best pitchers in fantasy because of the start of the year, then yes, absolutely get that fool to trade with you.
Absolutely. In terms of buyers and sellers for the team at the deadline, because that could also lead to fantasy value, and I have to ask this question: do you think that they will be sellers? And if they do, who would it likely be? It'll probably be like Knable, I guess, for another bullpen arm. And as Ruvain mentioned, maybe Sir Anthony Dominguez gets the save opportunities. How do you see any fantasy help or loss in terms of the trade deadline?
I think Knable's a good option, but again, like it would, they can't lose any semi-competent bullpen arms, is my opinion. So I guess they'd need to feel like they were really out of it. And I guess I find it kind of unlikely that Dombrowski will be in sell mode just because that's not what he does. But guys who will be free agents this offseason are Didi Gregorius. Unlikely to, have a lot of takers. I can't think of a lot of like contending teams who are like, what do we do at shortstop? And Kyle Gibson also, but the Phillies don't really have any starting depth. Christopher Sanchez is their long relief guy, and there's Bailey Falter and Hans Kraus, but there's not really a proven 6 starter type on their roster. So I think that Dombrowski would really need to feel, number one, that 22 is a loss and that he could get a piece that was going to be immediately helpful in 2023 because there are so many other pieces that are like really constructed around contending right now.
All right, let's move teams. Talk about the Atlanta Braves right now. Fantasy question is for Matt Olson. Very high expectations. A lot of people were comparing before the season Matt Olson with Pete Alonso. So far, Alonso is the winner between the two. Question is, what do we do in fantasy? Are we looking to acquire Matt Olson? Maybe he was unlucky and he going to get hot when the summer heat goes and his strength is power. So as the hot air comes in from the summer, he'll heat up. Should we trade him? Just hold? What are you doing with Matt Olson, Ellen, in fantasy right now?
I mean, so I love Matt Olson. He's one of my favorite players. So I'm probably biased, but I think what's likely to come around is the reason that you want him anyway is the power. So I think it's possible that the 17% strikeout rate that we saw last year might be an outlier. But I think that, he's got a 23.3% strikeout rate this year. And that's, I think, still perfectly good and perfectly sustainable. So it might be that he's more of a 260 hitter than a 270 hitter. But I don't think that those 10 points of batting average are why, if people are concerned about him, why they're concerned about him. So the reason that I would be buying is that if you look at his batted ball data, basically everything like max exit velo, average exit velo are the same or better than last year. His pull rate is the same. And the main thing that's different is his launch angle. So he has the lowest launch angle of his career so far. But I think that I trust Matt Olson. He's a premier power hitter to fix that, to sort of even that out. And his home run to fly ball rate is also a career low. And like his expected batting average and his XWO Bacon are better than his actual numbers. So I would say I'm buying.
Ruvain?
I actually agree with everything you said, except I'm going to say that I would sell on him because he's normally a better first half player than second half player. In 2019 and 2021, his second halves were much better than his first halves, and I think it has to do with him signing a big contract. This happened with Francisco Lindor last year. He did not do well. He was pressing, trying to, fill in the mantle of being the guy on the team. Matt Olson is trying to replace Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman can't be replaced. He was Mr. Atlanta Brave. That's what he's doing. So Matt Olson trying to replace him is putting a little pressure on him. That's probably why he's not having that home run to fly ball rate that he normally has, which is why he's not having the same results. That being said, recently there have been more home runs flying out of stadium, so it is possible that his home run total will go up. But statistically, Matt Olson has always done better in the first half than the second half, which is why I would sell him for this year, but I'd be all over him for next year.
That's interesting. Well, let's see where we would rank him. I think let's Pete Alonso. I'm assuming we will agree that if you had a choice between Alonso and Olsen rest of season, you would take Alonso. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Paul Goldschmidt. Would you rather have him?
I think so.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. What about C.J. Crone, who's been fantastic this year?
Oh, for me, that's Olsen. I mean, I agree that C.J. Crone has been fantastic, but and again, my proviso about how much I love Matt Olson. But yeah,
Right. No,
I
agree.
actually go C.J. Crone here because
Really?
Crone is still playing in Colorado. I know Philadelphia is Atlanta is not that great of a home run park, and he will visit good home run parks. But I'll go with C.J. Crone here because they're basically the same player. You want the power because they're both not known for their batting averages. So for power, I'm going C.J. Crone in Colorado.
If you can guarantee me that Crone's health would stay up the entire season, I might go Crone, but it's hard for me. I think it's Olsen for me. What about Freddie Freeman? To me, I think is obvious. It's Freddie Freeman.
Yes.
agreed.
Yes.
Anthony Rizzo?
Olsen.
Olsen.
Yeah, Olsen as well. What about Ty France?
Olsen. I mean, I love Ty
Yeah.
France, but yeah.
I would
Yeah.
take Ty France just because he has position eligibility all over the place and I can put him anywhere. But otherwise, statistically, it's Olsen.
Yeah, I'm taking Olsen. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I think there's no question there. How about Josh Bell? That's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one, but I'm still gonna go Olsen. I'm gonna I'm
gonna go.
I actually feel
Josh
like
Bell.
CJ Crone was the hardest one so
Yeah,
far, and it
yeah.
wasn't even that hard. I was immediately like, oh well,
Right.
it's Matt Olsen.
Well, I'm very high on Josh Bell. Josh Bell also has a better career average than Olsen, so I think I'd go Josh Bell.
I would go Olsen as well here. So to me, it seems that Olsen's value for Ruvain has changed quite a bit. For Ellen and I, probably not as much. What happened more is that C.J. Crone moved way, way up, and I think Paul Goldschmidt also moved way, way up as well. I think that's the gist of it, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
good gist.
The gist of it.
Good gist making, friend.
Yes. That's what we do here. Let's talk about another Brave. What about Eddie Rosario? Maybe it's more of an injury question for Ruvain. Listen, as you know by listening to the show, I love Eddie Rosario every single season in fantasy. I think it's the first year that I probably do not roster him anywhere, or if I do, very limited quantity. What is his health status? To me, he's a guy who can, out of nowhere, come back and really provide a little punch. I mean, this Eddie Rosario is somebody who has a fantastically low ground ball rate. He's got a very high contact rate. So he clearly was injured earlier this season. Otherwise, to me, he's a very, very high floor for production in a pinch. And he's had fantastic halves. He's never been able to really put together a full season that was amazing. But those half seasons were, top of the line outfielders. What is the status and what are your thoughts, Ruvain, about Eddie Rosario?
Well, Eddie Rosario is still recovering from eye surgery. He had a problem with his vision, and they're saying that he should be back sometime toward the possibly end of June, beginning of July, even mid-July, because he still hasn't started swinging a bat yet because of all these issues. Now, he started off very slowly. That's because of the poor vision, I assume. But that means that he never really had a true spring training. So he wasn't literally seeing the ball properly. So that can lead to bad mechanics. Does that lead to bad mechanics? I drafted Eddie Rosario in a couple of leagues. I dropped him almost immediately, and I have no interest in picking him up, only because I think there are better options out there, and Eddie Rosario has to prove to me. I'm not going to pay that high price that I have to pay on the free agent wire to get Eddie Rosario because you don't know what you're going to get, because you don't know if he created these bad habits in what he was doing earlier in the season, so I'm just very nervous about that.
What about you, Lon?
Yeah, I think. I mean, in terms, obviously, I defer to Ruvain on everything injury related. I was sort of thinking, oh well, an eye injury, at least you can still weightlift and stuff while you're doing that, as opposed to having to rest your hamstring or your bicep or whatever it is for 6 to 8 weeks. But I think that that's a really excellent point, and I think the sort of the question for me is like a playing time question when he gets back. It sort of feels too soon to prognosticate. But with Duvall and Ozuna both having sort of slower starts to the season, although Duvall's been heating up this week, I'm just wondering, where exactly, who is Rosario going to take playing time from? And I'm not asking that sarcastically or skeptically. I'm asking that genuinely. And a factor is certainly that Rosario's defense is even worse than Ozuna's. So, like, if I'm Atlanta, I'd want him to slot back in as a DH and not put either of them in the field. But then it's like, are they platooning at DH? So I don't know if it just comes down to which of them performs better. And it looks kind of crowded from this juncture.
Yeah, no, I agree. Fantasy irrelevant for now. Just very quickly to wrap up the Braves. Do you think that they have the best fantasy situation in terms of the dual catchers there? Travis d'Arnaud, excellent, who, by the way, just homered today, and William Contreras, who's got 8 homers, 304 average in a part-time role, earning a 1.2 WAR. I mean, this guy looks absolutely legit. Is this the best catching situation in all of baseball from a fantasy standpoint? I think yes.
I think it might be now that didn't Danny Jansen break his finger?
Yes.
Because I feel
correct.
like the Danny Jansen, Alejandro Kirk
Yes.
catcher tandem, I am jointly obsessed with both of them.
And they just called up Moreno today also, so he's in the mix also.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe still a player for that, but yes, I think the answer to your question is yes. I mean, William Contreras has been outstanding. He has a 1066 OPS. He has the Norman Conquest OPS. It's like my favorite OPS that a person could have. It fills me with joy.
Yes. You agree, Ruben? I'm assuming?
At this point, yes, but I think Toronto is up there also, even when Danny Jansen comes back, because he was actually hitting like a number one catcher now. So they actually have 3 number one catchers, I believe, number one hitting catchers in Toronto. So just because Contreras is doing well right now, that's great. But to have a trio like that they have possibly in Toronto, I think Atlanta's 1 and Toronto's a 1A.
Yeah. Hurry back, Danny Jansen.
On to the Marlins, who, by the way, have a ton of fantasy players who are very relevant. Let's talk about the guy at the top of the pitching staff there, Sandy Alcantara. Now, before the season started, I said that this guy would be very good outside the top 15. I had him maybe in my top 20, maybe 25. Nick Pollock, I have to give him credit, came on our show, and he's like, this is the man. He's the number 2 starting pitcher right now in fantasy baseball. So kudos to you, Nick Pollock. Never doubt you again. Well, I don't doubt him. I mean, I still ranked him pretty high. But is he going to finish the season in the top 10? Your thoughts, Ellen, on Sandy?
Yeah. I think top 10 for sure.
Yeah.
He's just an absolute workhorse. And, he's currently leading the majors in innings pitched. Thanks. Complete game shutout of Atlanta. Thank you. And he is third best in both ERA and expected ERA. So not exactly the same number, but third in both. And he throws 100. And he has 4 fantastic pitches. And his command of them has been just really locked in recently. So my thoughts are mostly that I meant to roster Sandy in every single draft that I had this year, and I'm sorry that I only got him once.
Yeah. The answer is that the key to him is that the innings will still be high. He threw over 200 innings last season. He was one of only 4 pitchers who broke the 200 inning barrier. And in today's day and age in fantasy, innings matter. I mean, if you're throwing 160 innings, wow, you're amazing. But he can throw 200 easy. And he did it last year, which means he's ready to do it again. Of course, do you know, Ellen, who the number 1 innings pitcher last year in fantasy in baseball was?
It was Zach Wheeler with 212 innings. Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
That's the key.
Yes.
Zach Wheeler.
He just got a lot more outs than Corbin Burns. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes.
Also, the Phillies beat Corbin Burns today. I'm also going to say that.
I see that you don't really agree with the Cy Young decision last year.
I don't know. I get it. I totally get it. I'm just poking fun.
Let's go to Ruven for this
I think that he's going to finish in the 100% in the top 10, because if you look who's in the top 10 right now of starting pitchers, you have Nestor Cortez. Is he going to stay in the top 10 area? Even in the top 20, Martin Perez, Tyler Anderson. Are they staying in there? Tony Gonsolin, is he going to stay in there? I don't think anyone is going to be able to overtake him to make him lose that spot. And Ellen, exactly what you said. 83 innings so far. He's got 9 quality starts out of 12, 9 quality starts out of 12 appearances. He is right now, I think, the Cy Young Award winner in the National League.
I agree.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
completely agree. And I think something for fantasy, I think some people might be like, oh, well, is he going to get fewer wins because he's on the Marlins? And if he's always pitching so deep into games, it just gives him a greater likelihood of getting a win, of getting his team, if not all the way through the entire game to the 9th inning, at least through to the 7th or 8th inning, and still getting that win.
100%. He's a monster in points leagues.
Oh, gosh.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of the other headed horse of the Pablo Lopez has been fantastic. Now, I think that Alcantara is actually a hold and maybe even a buy. In terms of fantasy, I think Pablo Lopez can hold what he's been doing, but I do think he is a sell. First of all, he's never done this level, so this is a new level for him. We don't know if that's going to last entirely. There's some regression, but he has been injury prone in the past, so there's always a risk. I remember we had Sarah Sanchez on the show who said, "Well, I just traded Clayton Kershaw, injury risk. Boom, the next day he got injured." He is an injury risk, but on top of that, they could shut him down. He's never really pitched that many innings, so they could shut him down or limit his work or whatever at the end of the season. So I do think Lopez, although I think he is going to be fantastic the rest of the year, question is how many innings, and for that reason, I think he is a sell. Do you agree, Ellen, on this?
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. I think what he's doing is like you think. I think it's completely legit. It's almost universally true that if you've got an ERA below 3, that your peripherals are going to be higher, often about a run higher. But so essentially his peripherals are still elite. Even if they have some regression baked into them. But I think that the injury risk is the main issue. As you mentioned, he missed time in 2018, 2019, and 2021 with shoulder strains. So it means that the 2021 or the 2020 shortened season is actually his own only quote full season, and he's never pitched more than 111 innings. I think that there is another potential issue that I think, this is the kind of issue that you will see with any number of very good pitchers, and so is not in and of itself a reason to sell. But he predominantly just uses 2 pitches, the fastball and his beautiful, beautiful changeup. So if one of them doesn't show up, you could be in for a bad outing. And by one of them, I mean, probably the changeup. So he had a sort of a bad outing versus the Nationals. I remember earlier this year where, he only went 3 innings because the changeup wasn't working.
That's true. You agree, Ruvain?
I actually would hold and I'd actually buy on Pablo Lopez. Why? Yes, he has the injury risk, but look what he's doing. I think he's found something to keep himself healthy. His fastball velocity is down a full mile per hour from last year, and it's the lowest it's ever been in his career. It's only at 92.9 on average this year. His career is 93.4, and last year he was at 94 miles an hour for his fastball. So he's dialing it back a little bit, which may be a strategy in a way for him to keep healthy, which is exactly what the Mets are trying to now get into Jacob deGrom's head. They want him to dial it back a little bit so you're able to stay on the mound, because yes, you're great if you throw 100 miles an hour and you strike everybody out, but if you're not on the field, you can't do anything. So I think him dialing it back, I think he's a little bit less of an injury risk for the rest of the year, and he's actually, for me, a buy as opposed to a sell.
Point taken. Wow, you've really been opposite
smart.
us the whole show. You've been taking the counterpoint here.
Oh, I do what I can.
It makes for good discourse. Eric
Yes.
and I on our podcast were like, we always agree with each other. And does that make for the best podcast?
That's true. Usually we agree a little bit more, but yeah. All right. Well, let's see. Let's talk a little bit about saves on the Marlins, or should we be avoiding the situation? Who gets the most saves rest of the season? is it even worth buying anyone? I'm going to say no. Good luck. You'll just spend empty fab dollars, or maybe just take Tanner Scott in the short term for cheap. And what do you think, Ellen? Any input on the save situation on the Marlins?
I will tell you that I have been staying out of it as a person who had drafted Dylan Floro in one league and had Anthony Bender for some time. And at this moment, I'm not rostering anybody from the Marlins. Because, it looks like Dylan Floro and Anthony Bass are sort of out of it. And Cole Sulser and Tanner Scott have been kind of divvying up the meager pie. And I feel like if I were in this bizarre hypothetical situation, forced at gunpoint to pick somebody, I would maybe go with Anthony Bender, just to say that like him coming back from injury kind of settles the whole dispute. But I think I would say that afraid that I was going to get a hypothetical bullet in the brain, because I think that's more that I just want to believe that because it feels like a simple answer, rather than I think probably just the chaos will continue to reign.
Did you know that Anthony Bender is Howard Bender's cousin?
I did not. I'm not sure that I know who Howard Bender is, if I'm honest.
I'm kidding. He's not. Howard Bender on Sirius XM, another
okay, all right.
another analyst. But no, he's not. He did try to fool me with that one, though, and I fell for it briefly.
I don't understand why I keep disagreeing with you. I think Dylan Floro is going to be the closer. I think that he hasn't had a spring training yet. He's just coming back from an injury. He was the closer last year, and he even got saves the year before that because the Marlins liked him, even though there were other possibilities on the roster the last couple of years. The Marlins seem to like Dylan Floro when it comes down to it, and I think they're just waiting for him to get into his own. I think Dylan Floro is the guy to have.
Great.
I might agree with Ruben on this one, actually. It's because it's a choice preference, and that's what they did last year. And they can save Bender for a high leverage role and just have Dylan as the closer, which is what they did last year. No reason to think, unless Mattingly gets fired, that they will do that. All right, let's move on to the Nationals here. Big news, Steven Strasburg has been called up. Ruvain, what is the injury status of him? Obviously, he's healthy now. What is your expectations for him? How long does he pitch per start? How long does he last the season? I'm asking a lot of questions, Ruvain.
Should I base it on what he did tonight, where he pitched 4 2/3 and gave up 7 runs?
Right.
I'm not really putting too much into Steven Strasburg. He's coming back from thoracic outlet surgery. Very few pitchers have come back and pitched effectively after that. Yes, he's been through so much, but they were doing the game was on MLB Network tonight, and I actually saw a stat that they put up there that they said in 2019 he had 33 starts, 209 innings, went 18-6. That was the year they won the World Series, and it was really good 3.3 ERA with a WHIP of 1.04. In 2020 and 2021 combined, 7 starts, 26 innings, 5.74 ERA, a 1.46 WHIP, and he's coming off a thoracic outlet surgery now. So I have I had no reason to roster him in any of my leagues. I don't have any interest in him whatsoever. He may get up to doing 5-6 innings, but the Nationals have him under contract for the next couple of years still. So they're stuck with him, so they're going to just roll them and see what they can get out of him.
You agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that, one of the sort of telling things about this start is not just the results, but that his velocity was just sitting at about 90. And certainly what we can see for the last couple of years with the less than stellar results that Ruben already mentioned is that that's about where his velocity was, and that the last time that he was really effective, his velocity was, averaging more like 93. So I think that, whether or not it's anything else to do with the injury, if simply his velocity is there, I just think it's going to be very hard for him to be effective.
Yeah, I'll just say this. I don't have high expectations, but I do think he's worth a small bid. I always go under the return on investment principle, and the way to win is a high return on investment, which either means a high return or a low investment. So if you can get Steven Strasburg cheap, why not throw him on your bench, See if he comes back to form. Worst things to worst, you cut him in a couple of weeks, and that's the end. Otherwise, you could be getting Steven Strasburg. I think it's worth a very low cost risk on the waiver wire here, just because of the return on investment principles. Just my feeling on him.
I don't know. I wouldn't even want a roster spot on him because there's so many players who are more valuable on the waiver wire than him at this point. So I don't even think I'd want to do that unless he has a couple of starts where he can put something together. But otherwise, to me, he's like Matt Harvey a couple of years ago when after he had thoracic outlet surgery, he just went down. He was never the same pitcher that he was ever. And I think, unfortunately, they're basically the same guy at this point. And I think that Steven Strasburg, the only thing he has more than Matt Harvey is that World Series ring, and that's what he got.
You're probably right. It all depends on your team circumstance. If you're in a 16-team deep league with 7 bench spots and 7 IL, and you don't have injuries, it's worth the shot. Depending upon where you are in the standings. A lot of people can get traded on this Nationals team. That's really disappointing. There's a lot of payroll coming off the books. Cesar Hernandez, Steve Cishek, Doolittle, Josh Bell also coming off the books. I think he's a good candidate to be traded. Does his value go up if he's traded? Is he likely to be traded? And curious to get your thoughts on this, Ellen. Do you think that Juan Soto gets traded in the middle of the season?
I do not think that Juan Soto gets traded in the middle of the season. I agree with you that I think Josh Bell looks like the most obvious target. And the reason that I don't think that Juan Soto gets traded isn't just because Mike Rizzo came out and said, hey, actually, we're not trading Juan Soto, but just because I don't think that there is a price that can be paid for Juan Soto. And I don't just mean, $500 million. I mean, in terms of a package that can be put together for somebody who is already, one of the 5 best hitters in baseball and is 23 years old. So the fact that he is younger than a lot of the prospects that you'd be dealing him for, I can't conceive of the trade package that would be worth Juan Soto.
Yeah, tend to agree on that. You disagree, Ruben?
No, I agree 100%. And actually, the Nationals GM went on radio saying that if they continue the trend that they're going to trade off all the expiring contracts that they can to get value. That includes Josh Bell, Cesar Hernandez, Maikel Franco, Steve Cishek. All those guys have expiring contracts and could have some value on another team, especially if they're making a playoff run.
Yeah. Thoughts on NL East predictions? Maybe, Ellen, you have a player prediction, team prediction. I'll ask you this. What do you think Fangraphs have the odds of the Phillies making the playoffs this year?
27%.
Ruben?
I'm going to say a little bit lower, like 22, 23%.
It's actually 36% that Fangraphs gives.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sweet. We're going to the playoffs. We're breaking the NL East longest playoff drought.
Yeah.
Or
Although
just NL, not NL East.
Although winning the division only 5%. The extra wild cards really helped this year.
Yes.
And they're at about 500, the Phillies. And you might get playoff teams this year that are just over 500. So don't count out the Phillies for this season, for sure not. I'm gonna predict, and maybe I shouldn't, that I do think the Mets are gonna make the play. They're gonna make the playoffs. I'm not gonna say win the division. I don't want to be too optimistic as a Mets fan, but I do think the Mets have enough that they've gained in the first 2 months of the season that it would. I mean, and this could happen. They could fall absolutely flat, but I think that they have a good chance to make the playoffs. And remember, they got reinforcements coming in DeGrom, hopefully, and Scherzer, who he'll have a good recovery, as well as Mets can trade also. And I think Steve Cohen is all in it. So I will see the Mets. I think the Mets will make the playoffs. Anybody disagree on that, or have any special any predictions?
The Mets are definitely making the playoffs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think the Mets are going to win the division. And my only dream is that the Phillies finish in second place. And my only nightmare is that Atlanta wins the division again. I'm just bored of it.
Well, I think the Braves are going to make a run. I think the Braves are going to give the Mets all they can, and you can't really depend on those reinforcements coming for the Mets because they never came last year. We thought DeGrom was going to come back last year; he didn't come back, so you can't always bet on those reinforcements. But you do have the big wallet of Steve Cohen, who can basically fill holes whenever he wants to. So if, let's say, the Nationals do want to trade a guy like Juan Soto, then they can maybe package a dead contract like a Patrick Corbin with him, and the Mets would certainly absorb that and trade a couple of top prospects to get Juan Soto to Citi Field.
It's funny. The Mets were reluctant to take on the Padres. They could have gotten Eric Hosmer with a good reliever and with Paddock, who we know was injured. But they could have had that package for Dom Smith, who they demoted, and they declined that and absorbing Eric Hosmer money. I found that surprising. But I mean, the Mets are not taking anybody. I think they're being super selective, as Sandy Alderson is still involved.
Yeah, but I think taking Juan Soto is not really being selective. It's just being smart because he's one of the best players in baseball.
Wow.
So that's not even a question. If he's available, you don't think that the Mets GM is going to knock on the door and see what the asking price is? If he wouldn't, he'd be crazy not to. Same with any team in the playoff run. They just ask. There's no harm in asking. It's called kicking the tires. We haven't heard that term in a while, but all the teams are going to kick the tires for all the players on the Nationals, all the players on the Marlins, and just see what you can get out of them. If you can get someone that can fill a hole, by all means, do it.
Yeah, but I think there's a better chance that we'll see Aaron Judge in a Mets uniform than Juan Soto. I think that maybe Cohen's going to wait for that to happen rather than sell the farm on a Soto.
It would be so delightful.
Wouldn't that? I was actually just
so
listening
great.
to Ian Kahn on his show the other day, and he's like, you know what? If Aaron Judge signs with the Mets, I'm going to convert and be a Mets fan. I'm going to come to games. Okay.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yes.
All rise with the Mets apple, right?
that would be tremendous. All right, waiver wire time. It's where we talk about a couple of potential pickups that might help your fantasy teams this week. Ellen, who do you got for us? Who's a player that you might be interested in this week?
So, sticking with our NL East theme, Luis Garcia of the Nationals. He is, I believe, currently second base eligible, but he's been playing shortstop. And so if he doesn't have that in your league, he might pick that up. So Alcides Escobar is injured, and the Nats have brought Garcia back up. And it could be that, now he's actually ready to be in the majors. So they had brought him up in 2020 straight from AA when he was only 20 years old. And obviously, next to Juan Soto, everybody's like, well, but you're 20, but like Juan Soto can play in the majors, so can't you also? And he's like, oh, I'm not Juan Soto, sorry. But now that he has had 79 games at AAA in 2021 and 2022, where he had a 931 OPS. Maybe he's ready for the majors. So he's still only 22, but it seems like he's kind of 22 and also post-hype. But he's still younger than a lot of prospects. And he has a sort of a high BABIP, but he's hitting so far .333 in 7 games with a homer.
Cross that one off my list. I would have said the same one. Any other names to mention?
Oh, well, why doesn't somebody else go? And we'll
right.
see if we have other repeats.
Let's do it. Ruvain?
All right, well, I'm going to do a former NL East guy, and that's Paul Sewald. He's had 2 saves this week. He's got an ERA of 2.21 with a .84 ERA, 19 strikeouts in 20 innings. He's only owned in 34% of CBS leagues. He's an option for saves for Seattle. He's definitely a guy to get. I mentioned Sir Anthony Dominguez before. He's got a 1.74 ERA, 1.02 whip, 26 strikeouts in 20 innings, and should he become closer, his value just goes through the roof. And one more NL East guy, since we're sticking with the theme, I mentioned this guy, I think, last week, John Birdie. He's got 8 stolen bases for the year. He's batting .273, only 8% owned in CBS, with Brian Anderson on the IL, with Joey Wendell on the IL. He's eligible in third base. He's eligible almost in the outfield and second base. He's had 7 stolen bases in his last 10 games since he became the starter. So if you need stolen bases, he's available in most leagues.
I'm going to stick with the Marlins here. Garrett Cooper, 30% owned, batting .313 on the year with 4 homers. And by the way, since May 1st, 3 of those homers, batting .339. He has had injury problems in the past, but he's good while he goes, so Garrett Cooper. I'll mention 2 others. Jose Miranda, we were very high on Jose Miranda before the season. He's now starting to heat up. Twins are high on him in June so far. 2 homers, batting .400, 7 RBI. He's interesting. And is it Nico Horner? 25% owned on CBS. He's back from the IL. A lot of people, might have dropped him because he was injured. And a lot of times you get these players who come back, and if you get him the first week, you can get him. He's batting .293 in the year with 3 homers, 6 stolen bases. In rotisserie, that profile plays. His strikeout rate this year is 12%, so a lot of contact. That'll keep that batting average hot. Definitely a good fill-in for somebody if you need a pinch of speed and not be a zero in the power. Horner might be good. And by the way, if you are in a league that is 2 catchers, we mentioned Gabriel Moreno is up. I would take a flyer on him. Not in 1 catcher leagues, in 2 catcher leagues. Certainly if you do have, if Alejandro Kirk is somehow available, obviously he's the guy. And we mentioned William Contreras earlier. If he's not picked up in your league, even in 1 catcher leagues, he's worth a shot, I think, as well.
I have a couple of other people.
Please.
Ezekiel Duran of the Rangers is, I think, second base eligible, but has been playing mostly third base, so we might get that. This is Josh Smith's injury. And he is 23 years old, and they brought him straight up from Double-A for contrast and comparison to the Luis Garcia situation. And he is also hit very well, .316 with a high BABIP and a homer in 5 games. And the minor league track record would suggest that he's more likely to steal the occasional base than Garcia with 19 across high A last year. But I feel like more confident that Luis Garcia maybe sticks. And the other person that I could mention is Bryson Stott, because I'm going to pick only middle infielders. It's funny, when I was on In the Deep, I was supposed to just pick some players that I love, and I picked only second baseman. It was hilarious. So Bryson Stott has been on fire in the Rob Thompson era of Phillies baseball, and he has hit all 3 of his homers on the season in the last week. And it's also true that since he came back to the majors from being sent down earlier in the year, he has cut the strikeout rate to a manageable 26%, and he's also been walking more, not a lot, but more, at 8%. However, both of those have been trending even further in the right direction over the last week. Obviously, it's a small sample, and it makes sense, though, because there's been specific mention, he's talked about focusing on letting the ball get deeper over the plate. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. Stott, if he's available in your league, he is heating up. So grab.
But yeah, I think, because he's batting 188, I think even if he was drafted in your league, it's quite possible that he was dropped.
Yeah, just like we said about Wheeler. Anytime you see the full season, because a lot of people, what they do is they go to the waiver wire and they go, well, let's sort by whatever. And, well, that guy's batting 188. I don't know. If you're one of those guys who do that, you might have to look a little bit deeper sometimes at, what's he done the past month. I like to set my view, if I'm going to do that kind of thing, I do 30 days. Or 28 days, a month worth, because a lot of times those full season numbers can either be overly deceiving or not, especially that batting average varies very wildly in the beginning. So be very careful when you do that, and that might keep Stott's numbers down. And for the astute fantasy player, just as Ellen mentioned, good time to pick him up, and that might keep his numbers low. All right, time for the pitcher preview. Let's see who the Pirates are playing this week. All right. Ellen, do you have a pitcher to pick up this week?
Sure. I think Alex Fido having 2 starts this week versus the White Sox and Texas is sort of an interesting 2-start pitcher option. He's having a pretty good season, although, again, caveat emptor, his peripherals suggest a regression on his 2.92 ERA. The thing with Fido is that his slider is a great pitch when it's on. It has been good for a 35% CSW, but his four-seamer has been 92.4 94 miles an hour on average, so that's not exceptional. And his changeup isn't much good for strike with just 17% CSW. 23 is league average on a changeup for context. Still, I feel like it's a good gamble that one of those two starts is a good one.
Yeah,
if you're looking for wins, then definitely. Ruvain?
I have two guys. I don't think either of them are two start, but two guys that you should think of picking up, especially if they're available. I'm going to mention him again. I mentioned before, Zach Eflin. He's only 65% owned in CBS, and he started in only half those leagues, which to me is crazy. He's possible to start next week, Miami and Washington. He's got 22 strikeouts in the last 21 innings, and through the 3.86 ERA. And same thing by looking at his stats, what he's done for the whole year. If you take out just the Mets and the Dodgers that he played, I mean, he gave up 7 runs to the Mets one outing. He gave up 6 runs, 5 earned to the Mets one time, and the Dodgers he faced as well. If you take those numbers out, his ERA and WHIP are going to be so much better. So don't be fooled by those ERAs and WHIPs when you see them right away. Second guy I want to mention is Ross Stripling. With Hyunjin Ryu injured indefinitely with a forearm injury, Stripling has been pitching to a 3.65 ERA, a 1.14 WHIP, 31 strikeouts in 37 innings, and this is a long-term hold because the Blue Jays are in it. He's proven himself in the past, and they need someone to take that roster spot. So Nate Pearson is nowhere near coming back yet, so Ross Stripling is the guy to go for.
He is playing the Yankees this week, though, so I caution you on playing them.
Which is why he may be even cheaper this week, because people may not want him because he's playing the Yankees, so you can put an even lower fab bid on him.
True. I just wouldn't play him this week.
Unless you're in one of those leagues where you have to play him the same week that you pick him up.
Yeah.
I know those exist. I don't play in one of those leagues, but I know they exist.
Tout Wars, we have to. If you pick up Tout Wars, you have to play him, so... but yes, if you can put him on a hold, then sure. I'll mention two guys. I'm gonna go back to the NL East. David Peterson on the Mets. Mets seem to win. David Peterson starts. He's a lefty. He's playing Milwaukee, and by the way, Milwaukee is not a good hitting team, even though they're in first place. They're not a good hitting team. What's keeping them in the mix is their pitching. And he's also facing Miami, so I think that chance for a win. Mets are a good team, so chance for a win. They're both at home. In front of the home crowd, so maybe take a gamble on that. Peterson also has a 53% ground ball rate, so the chance for blow-ups are minimized when you have a high ground ball rate. I also I've mentioned him in the show a couple of weeks ago, but Jake Junis. We spoke to Brian Bannister, the director of pitching for the Giants. They really know what they're doing to change around pitchers. He's been fantastic this year. 2.51 ERA, 0.93 WHIP. His last 3 outings, 1 run, 2 runs. He's only 40% owned, and he's playing Kansas City Royals at home. To me, that's a start. And bonus, the following week, he's to start. So you're getting him for a good start this week. You're getting a 2-start play next week. One of them includes a home start against Cincinnati. I think Jake Junis is my vote for who you should pick up this week.
Yeah, get that Jake Junis now.
Absolutely. All right, Ruvain, time for the injury update.
All right, we'll start with Andrew Kittredge of the Tampa Bay Rays. He's going to be having surgery to remove a loose body in his elbow. He'll be out at least a month, so whoever closes for the Rays is going to close for the Rays. Don't ask me who, because they change every day. Steven Matz, a former Met, had a setback with his shoulder. If you still roster him, please drop him. He has an ERA of 6 before the shoulder injury. Why would you want to hold on to him at this point? I think he's an easy drop. Carson Kelly is coming back from an oblique injury. He's currently on his rehab assignment. He should be back possibly, if not over the weekend, sometime next week. Kike Hernandez was placed on the IL with a hip flexor strain. We don't know how bad that's going to be, so it just happened, so we'll see how that works out. And this is NL East. I have to mention some of the Mets updates. First of all, Pete Alonso, he was hit on the hand. He said he has no broken bones. MRI and X-ray showed no broken bones. However, he said he had the same type of injury last year, and because he didn't rest it for 3 weeks, he was not the same player. So it's still very possible that even though nothing's broken, they may put him on the IL, so just watch out for that. Starling Marte with his quad, he injured it sliding into second base. Also, not on the IL yet. If he can't play by Saturday or Sunday, they still may put him on the IL, so watch out for that. By the time this airs, Tyler McGill will hopefully have started because he's scheduled to start Friday night. Max Scherzer has begun throwing bullpen session, which was great. Jacob deGrom also is trending in the right direction. He's playing catch, and he's ramping up and everything. But remember, he still has to have his spring training done again. So he has to build up time. So you have to see how he's going to do. And especially they mentioned about possibly dialing him back with his velocity. So we'll see how that works out. And a reminder overall, 10-day IL for hitters, 15-day for pitchers, 60-day IL for players who are on the active roster. They would get taken off the active roster. So if a team needs a roster spot, don't get freaked out if a player's been out for like a month and a half and they put them on the 60-day IL. That doesn't mean players are getting worse. It just means they need a roster spot.
All right. And that is the end of our show. I want to thank Ellen for coming on the show. Before we go, please tell the audience where we can see you regularly and all things Ellen Adair.
Yeah, that's a great question. Where can you see me regularly? Probably you can see me most regularly on Twitter at Ellen_Adair or on Instagram at EllenAdairG. That's just the letter G at the end. Somebody else already had Ellen Adair. Fie on them. Yeah, I'm on MLB Network's show Off Base, usually about once a week, but it kind of moves around. And I am, also an actor in various and other sundry things.
Amazing.
Oh, and I have a podcast called Take Me Into the Ball Game, so you can look that up. But you can't see me there. It's purely an auditory medium.
Yes, that's where you review baseball movies in terms of their baseball input, their watchability. I actually, I had you on our car as we were taking a vacation this past year, and we listened. I don't know, half the way up. I can't remember which movie it was. It was definitely a movie that my wife saw also. But good stuff. You took us through our journey there. So thanks.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for listening. Yes, we grade baseball movies on the 20 to 80 scouting scale used for baseball prospects. That is the absurdity that we've been at for over 2 years now.
There you go. All right, Ruben, what about you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. You can also catch my weekly article on Rotobowler discussing the injuries, next player up, and who to expect and how long they're going to be out for.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can read my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer. On Twitter, I'm at ATCNY, the shortest Twitter handle in fantasy baseball, no doubt. And, of course, you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. All right, once again, thank you so much, Ellen Adair, for guesting on our show this week. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.